I never told my daughter what I kept locked inside that safety deposit box at First National Bank on Elm Street. When she married Preston, I made sure his name was never on the account, never on anything that mattered. I was sitting on my back porch in Savannah last October, watching the sun go down over the marsh, when my phone lit up with her number. "Dad," she said, and I knew from the first syllable something was wrong. "He's at the bank right now. He's telling them he's your authorized representative. He has a document, Dad. It looks real. I've been waiting for exactly this moment for 4 years. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. I want to know who's out there with me." I was finishing my second cup of coffee on that porch, the kind of evening where the Spanish moss hangs perfectly still and the air smells like salt and rain coming in from the coast, when my daughter called. Her name is Claudette, and she has her mother's habit of leading with silence before the hard part. So when she said "Dad" and then stopped, I set down my cup. "He went to the bank this morning," she said finally. "He told them he's helping you manage your affairs. He said you're not well, Dad. He said you have memory problems and you asked him to help you access your accounts." I felt something go very quiet inside me. Not panic. The opposite of panic. Is the box open? No. Mr. Beret Hendricks. He's the branch manager. You know him. He told Preston he needed to verify with you directly before allowing access to anything. But Preston is still there. He's demanding to speak to a supervisor. He brought some kind of notarized letter. I stood up from that porch chair slowly, the way you do at 67 when your knees remind you every morning that you are not 30 anymore. My sister Loretta was visiting from Colombia, and she was inside washing dishes, and I could hear the water running and the radio she always turns on low in whatever kitchen she's in. "I need you to do something right now," I told my daughter. "Call the bank back. Tell Mr. Chorter Hendricks that I am completely well, that Preston has no authorization to access anything in my name, and that if he does not leave the premises voluntarily, you have my permission to ask them to call the police. Then call our attorney, Nelson Webb. His number is on the refrigerator where I gave it to you 2 years ago. Tell him it's time. He'll know what that means." Time for what? What does that mean? In the background, I could hear a voice, distant and tight, the particular pitch of a man who feels entitled and is not getting what he wants. Was that him? "Yes," she said quietly. "I'm booking a flight to Atlanta tonight. Don't let him know I'm coming. And sweetheart, I need you to trust me right now, even though I haven't explained everything. There are things I should have told you sooner. I know that. But your mother asked me to wait until I was certain." The call ended, and I stood there with the phone in my hand, while the marsh went from orange to purple to dark. Loretta had turned off the water inside. She appeared at the screen door and looked at me the way she has looked at me since we were children. That particular look that means she already understands without being told. "It's Preston," I said. She nodded once. "Your Dorothy called it." She had. My wife Dorothy had called it 4 years ago, sitting up in the hospital bed at Memorial Health in Savannah, 6 weeks before the cancer finished what it had started. She'd been sharp until very close to the end. Sharp in that way she always was. The kind of woman who could read a room in 30 seconds and a person in 5 minutes. She'd been a paralegal for 22 years before she retired, and she understood exactly how documents worked and how people used them, and how money disappeared from families who weren't careful. "Claudette is too kind for her own good," Dorothy told me one night when the ward was quiet, and I was sitting next to her bed holding her hand. "She sees the best in people and she keeps seeing it, even when the evidence says something different. Preston knows that. He knew it when he picked her. I thought she was being hard on him. He seemed fine to me then. Attentive, good job in commercial real estate. Nice enough at holidays. But Dorothy had grown up watching her own grandmother lose a house in Birmingham to a man who'd married her aunt for property and patience, and she had a long memory for patterns. So she'd made me promise, and then she'd told me exactly what she wanted me to do. We'd opened the safety deposit box at First National the following spring. 6 months after she passed. Not for jewelry or old documents. Dorothy had been specific. She wanted a record, a paper record that existed somewhere outside our house, somewhere Preston couldn't stumble across it, and somewhere Claudette wouldn't accidentally find it before she was ready to see it. Inside that box, a copy of the family trust we'd restructured after Dorothy died, copies of the deeds to our property in Savannah and the small rental house in Tybee Island, the life insurance policy, and 3 years of a notebook I'd been keeping in Dorothy's honor. Every conversation that gave me pause, every moment I'd watched Preston look at my daughter and see something other than my daughter. And in the very back of that box, a sealed envelope with Claudette's name on it in Dorothy's handwriting. The flight from Savannah to Atlanta was 2 hours with the layover in Charlotte. I sat in a middle seat between a young woman with headphones and a man reading a thriller, and I spent the entire time thinking about the first night I knew something was wrong. It was Thanksgiving, 3 years ago. Claudette and Preston had been married 14 months. We were at my house, just the 3 of us, because Preston's family was in Phoenix and the drive was too far. I'd made Dorothy's cornbread dressing, which I do every year, because the recipe is in her handwriting on a card in my kitchen drawer, and making it is the only way I know how to have her at the table still. Preston had helped himself to seconds, and then looked around the dining room in that particular way he had, slow and assessing, and said, "You know, a house like this in Savannah right now, what are we talking? 800,000–900,000? I looked at him. "The neighborhood has really come up," he said, as if continuing a conversation we'd been having. "I was talking to a guy in my office who sold on Jones Street last spring. Similar square footage. Got 1.1. I said, "I'm not planning to sell." "Oh, I know," he laughed. "I'm just saying, you're sitting on a real asset here." That was the first entry in the notebook. November, Thanksgiving. Question about property value, unprompted during dinner. Over the next year, the questions became a current that ran beneath every visit. He was careful. He never said anything you could directly object to, but it accumulated. Did I have a financial advisor? Had I thought about what happened to the Tybee house if something happened to me? Claudette mentioned that Preston thought it might make sense for them to be added to the deed, just for continuity, just so nothing got complicated with probate. Preston thought I should look at a living trust. Preston had a colleague who specialized in estate planning for older homeowners. I was 64. I called Nelson Webb after the second conversation about the Tybee house deed. Nelson had been Dorothy's attorney, and he knew our situation completely. I told him what I was observing, and he listened without interrupting, which is one of the reasons Dorothy had trusted him. "We need to restructure," he said when I finished. "Make everything airtight, and you need to start writing things down." So I did. I wrote down everything, every question Preston asked about the property, every suggestion that arrived wrapped in concern for my well-being. The evening he brought up, casually, that some older folks found it helpful to add a trusted family member to their financial accounts. Just for emergencies. Just to help out. I said I manage my own accounts fine, thank you. The look that crossed his face lasted only a second, but I caught it. 14 months ago I'd overheard something I wasn't meant to hear. Claudette and Preston were in my kitchen, and I'd come in from the garden without them noticing. Preston was on his phone, half turned away, and I heard him say, "He keeps everything locked down, but he's getting older. It's just going to take time." I stood in the doorway for a moment, and then I went back outside, and I sat in Dorothy's garden chair, and I thought about what she'd told me in that hospital room. And I thought about the notebook in the safety deposit box, and I thought, not yet. Not yet. But soon. The Uber from Hartsfield-Jackson took 40 minutes to reach my daughter's neighborhood in Decatur. It was past 9 at night. The lights were on in their house, a craftsman bungalow on a tree-lined street that Claudette had bought the year before she met Preston, the year she got her first real promotion at the hospital where she works as a social worker. The house was in her name alone. I had made sure she understood when she bought it to keep it that way. Both cars were in the driveway. Claudette's sensible Subaru and Preston's Infiniti, which ran him $820 a month, payments he had quietly shifted so that Claudette's direct deposit covered them while his own money went into accounts she didn't have full visibility on. I knew this because I pay attention. Claudette opened the door before I knocked. She looked like she hadn't slept, which she probably hadn't. Behind her, in the living room, Preston was standing near the fireplace with his arms crossed, and he'd dressed himself in the careful way men dress when they are preparing to be reasonable. "Richard," he said, using my name the way he always did, which I'd noted early on. "Not Mr. Holt, not Dad or anything close to it. Richard." Calibrated informality. I stepped inside. "I think we all need to sit down and have an honest conversation," he said. "I know you're upset about what happened at the bank today, but I want you to understand that my intentions were—" "Sit down," I said. He sat. Claudette sat beside me on the sofa. She'd been crying recently, I could tell, and she'd washed her face and was holding herself with the specific composure of someone who has decided to be calm because they are afraid of what happens if they stop. I set my bag on the floor and looked at Preston. "I've been waiting to have this conversation for 3 years, I said. "Let's not waste any more time." "I have no idea what you think you've been documenting," he said, and his voice was careful, reasonable, the voice of a man who has rehearsed being misunderstood. "But I've been trying to help this family. Claudette deserves to know what she stands to inherit. She deserves to understand the financial picture, and you have been deliberately—" "What she stands to inherit," I said. He didn't register it. He kept going. "You've been deliberately keeping her in the dark about assets that affect her future and her security, and as her husband, Preston." I kept my voice level. "What did you tell the bank this morning?" His jaw tightened. "I said I was helping you manage your affairs." "Which I was trying to do. You told them I have memory problems." The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds. "I said you'd been having some difficulty," he said, which is a natural thing to say when an older. "I was in Savannah yesterday morning. I cooked breakfast, drove to the hardware store, had coffee with my neighbor, and then sat on my back porch reading for 2 hours. My memory is fine. My mind is fine. What you told that bank was a lie, and you used that lie to try to access accounts that have nothing to do with you." "Claudette," he said, turning toward her, "you can see what he's doing. He's been trying to come between us since before we were married. He never trusted me. He never gave me a real chance. I watched my daughter. She was looking at her hands. I pulled out the notebook. It was a plain brown composition notebook, the kind you can buy at any drugstore, and I'd been writing in it for 3 years, in the same pen Dorothy used to use for grocery lists, a black rollerball from the box of them she kept in the kitchen drawer. I opened to the first marked page. "November, Thanksgiving dinner," I said. "Unprompted question about the market value of my property." I read the entry in full. Then March, 8 months later. Second conversation about adding names to the Tybee deed, this time framed as concern for my daughter's security in case of my death. Then the overheard phone call. 14 months ago. I read that one slowly. Preston's expression had moved through several things while I was reading. Careful denial. Then a kind of stillness. Then something I recognized as calculation, running through options, figuring out the best available response. "You were eavesdropping," he said. "That's a violation of." Then I set the notebook down and I took out a folder. "I spoke with Nelson Webb before I boarded my flight tonight," I said. "Nelson has filed paperwork to confirm the trust structure and all titled assets. The house here in Decatur is in Claudette's name alone and will remain so. The Savannah property, the Tybee rental, and the investment accounts are all held in a trust that names Claudette as sole beneficiary. In the event of my death, the assets pass directly to her, not to her estate. Under Georgia law, trust assets do not automatically become marital property." Preston stood up. "This is insane. I'm her husband. I have rights." "You have no rights to assets you didn't build," I said. I looked at my daughter. She still hadn't spoken. Her hands were flat on her knees, and she was staring at the coffee table, and I could see she was doing the math, quietly, on things she hadn't let herself add up before. "Claudette," Preston said, and his voice had changed now, softer, urgent in a different way. "Don't let him do this. He's been trying to control you your whole life. He never thought I was good enough. This is him using money to keep you dependent on him, instead of—" "The infinity payments," Claudette said. Preston stopped. She looked up. Her voice was quiet. "He's had you paying the car note for 14 months. You told me they came out of your account. You showed me a screenshot. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to." She turned to him. "Show me your bank account, right now. Take out your phone and show me." The thing about Preston was that he was good at many things, but he had never planned for my daughter to stop believing him. That possibility had apparently not fully entered his calculations. He did not take out his phone. She stood up. "I want you to go stay somewhere else tonight. I need to think." His face went hard then, all the careful reasonableness gone. "You can't ask me to leave my own house." "The house is mine," Claudette said. "My name is on the deed. You know that because you've asked me about it twice." She walked to the front door and opened it. He looked at me, then at her. Then he picked up his keys from the table by the door, and he walked out, and she closed the door behind him and locked it and stood there with her hand still on the deadbolt. Then she leaned her forehead against the door, and the sound she made was not quite crying. I got up and I put my hand on her shoulder the way I used to when she was small and had a bad dream and didn't want to be talked to. Just wanted to know someone was there. We stood like that for a little while. She turned around eventually and looked at me with Dorothy's eyes. I've seen those eyes in my daughter's face for 34 years, and they still catch me sometimes. She said, "What's in the safety deposit box?" "Everything your mother planned," I said, "and a letter she wrote for you." We went to the bank the next morning when it opened. Mr. Hendricks brought us to a private room and brought the box and left us alone, the way good bank managers understand to do. The box held exactly what I'd put in it. The trust documents, property records, insurance policy, the notebook's sister volume, an earlier one from the first year of my keeping notes. But Claudette went directly to the back. She took out the envelope, Dorothy's handwriting, her name in blue ink, the way her mother had written everything, neat and a little slanted to the right. She opened it slowly. It was 4 pages. Dorothy had written it 10 days before she died, when she was tired enough that the handwriting wavered in places, but clear enough that you could read every word. I had read it once, the day Dorothy asked me to seal it, and I had not opened it again. Claudette read it in silence. I watched the light come through the small window of the room and thought about Dorothy writing those pages. How much she had loved our daughter. How much it had cost her to write something like that while she was dying. When Claudette finished, she set the pages flat on the table and pressed her palms down on them. She said, "She knew. She always knew. She knew from the beginning that someone would come along who would see you as a door instead of a person." Claudette looked up. She wrote something at the end. She said that the point of all of it, the trust and the protections and everything, wasn't to keep me from living my life. It was to make sure I had a foundation to come back to, so that no matter what happened, I'd always have somewhere solid to stand. "That's exactly what she meant," I said. She cried then, the real kind, not the composed, near-crying of the night before. I passed her the box of tissues the bank had left on the table, and I let her take her time. 8 months have passed. 8 months of paperwork and lawyers and the particular exhaustion of watching a marriage dissolve in documents and mediation sessions. The divorce moved faster than anyone expected, partly because the house was never jointly titled and partly because Nelson Webb had made everything else airtight enough that Preston's attorney had very little to work with. He left with what he'd brought in, which was not much. The Infinity went back to the dealership when he couldn't keep up with the payments on his own. Last I heard, he'd moved to Charlotte and started over somewhere new. Claudette blocked his number the third time he called to tell her she'd made a mistake. She didn't waver. It's Sunday again. Sundays have become our day, mine and Claudette's, the way Sundays were mine and Dorothy's for 38 years. Some weeks she drives down to Savannah and we cook. Last weekend, we made Dorothy's shrimp and grits from the recipe card in the kitchen drawer, and Claudette took a photo of the card and texted it to herself so she'd have it. This weekend I drove up to Decatur. She'd mentioned she wanted to show me something. She had a friend over when I arrived, a woman named Pauline, a colleague from the hospital. They'd been laughing about something when I knocked, and they both had coffee, and Pauline stood up and shook my hand and said she'd heard a lot about me, which made Claudette say she hadn't said that much, which made Pauline raise her eyebrows. After Pauline left, Claudette sat across from me at her kitchen table. She's been refinishing it, sanding it down and staining it herself, spending Sunday afternoons learning things she put off because Preston had never been interested in projects like that. She said, "I owe you an apology." "No, you don't. I didn't trust you. When you were distant with him, when you never seemed fully comfortable. I told myself you were just being overprotective. I decided you didn't want me to have anyone. You wanted to be loved. That's not something to apologize for." She turned her coffee cup in her hands. "Mum knew, and I think I did too. I think part of me knew, and it felt easier not to look at it. That's the hardest kind of thing to admit," I said. "And you still made the right choice when it mattered." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I've been thinking about what to do with the Tybee house." I looked at her. "I don't want to sell it. But I've been renting it out, and the income has been going into a savings account, and it's more than I expected. I want to use some of it to start something." She paused. "There are families that come through the hospital, single parents who just lost a spouse, who have kids and no plan and nothing in writing. Nobody ever told them how any of this works. I want to help with that. Some kind of workshop or resource fund. Practical stuff. Estate basics. How to protect what you have." I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight. "Your mother would call that exactly right," I said. "She called it something Dorothy would say." We sat at that kitchen table until it was dark outside, planning what the program might look like, who we partner with, whether Nelson knew of a non-profit structure that made sense. The ordinary mechanics of turning grief into something that lasts. When I got up to leave, she walked me to my car. The October air in Decatur had that smell that Georgia gets in fall, something woodsy and clean underneath the regular city smell. She hugged me at the car longer than usual. She said, "Thank you for keeping your promise to her." I held on to my daughter for a moment and thought about Dorothy, about the evening she'd made me swear, about all the years of quiet preparation that followed, about how much we'd loved one particular person so much that we'd worked together across the distance of death to make sure she was all right. "Drive safe," Claudette told me. "I will." I drove back down I-16 towards Savannah with the radio low and the Georgia night flat and wide on both sides of the highway. By the time I pulled onto my street, I was tired, the way you're tired after something long is finally over. I sat in the driveway for a minute before going in. On the mantel inside, there's a photograph of Dorothy from maybe 15 years ago, standing on the beach at Tybee with her shoes in her hand and her face turned towards something off-camera that had just made her laugh. That's the photograph I look at when I need to remember who she was before she was sick. Full of life and sense, and a kind of practical love that didn't require anything to be perfect in order to be real. I said, "We did it," into the quiet car. "She's okay. She has somewhere solid to stand." I could almost hear Dorothy's voice back, the way she'd say something true, and then expect you to already know it. I went inside. The safety deposit box at First National is still there on Elm Street. Claudette and I are both authorized on it now. Everything Dorothy planned is still in there, though what it protects has changed. It's not just paperwork anymore. It's the record of how much one woman loved her daughter while she still had time to do something about it. Preston left that house with nothing because he never understood what the house actually contained. He saw the Savannah property and the Tybee rental and the trust statements, and he thought that was the inventory. He never noticed that the real thing in that family was standing right in front of him. He never noticed Claudette at all. If you take one thing from this story tonight, let it be this. The protections your family needs are not complicated, but they have to be put in place before you need them, not after. Talk to an attorney, write things down, tell your children what you've built and why you built it before someone else starts explaining it to them for their own purposes. And if someone in your life seems more interested in what your family owns than in who your family is, trust what you see. Write it down. Thank you for listening tonight. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And please subscribe to Voices of Uncle Samuel. I'll be here every week with another story that stays with you. I've thought a lot about what made Preston believe he could walk into a bank, tell a stranger my mind was gone, and simply take what wasn't his. And I don't think it was stupidity. I think it was the particular kind of confidence that comes from years of facing no real consequences. He'd said things that weren't true before, and they'd worked. He'd moved money around in ways Claudette couldn't see, and nothing had come of it. He'd asked questions about property values and inheritance timelines, and no one had written any of it down. Every small success had taught him that careful people aren't actually that careful, that the world mostly rewards whoever acts boldest. He was wrong about us. But he wasn't wrong about most people. And that's what I keep sitting with. Dorothy understood this before I did. She'd watched her grandmother's sister lose a house in Birmingham to a man with a patient plan and a sympathetic face. She'd seen how it happened, step by step, how each small concession made the next one easier to ask for, how the people being taken advantage of were usually the ones who trusted most and documented least. So she didn't leave Claudette a warning. She left her a foundation. There's a difference. A warning disappears when someone you love looks at you with convincing eyes. A foundation stays. What I've learned is that wisdom isn't about being suspicious of everyone. It isn't about closing yourself off or treating every new person as a threat. Claudette is warm and open, and that's not a flaw. That's one of the finest things about her. What Dorothy wanted, what I tried to carry out, was to make sure that warmth couldn't be used against her, that her kindness had a flaw underneath it that no one could pull away. The character of what a person builds matters, not just the money, not just the property. The decisions made quietly, the things written down when no one is watching, the attorney called before there's a crisis, all of that is a form of integrity. It's choosing to be honest with yourself about what you see, even when seeing it is uncomfortable. I watched Preston for 4 years, and I wrote down what I observed because I believed that truth, documented plainly, is more durable than anyone's charm. And Claudette, what she showed me in those months after, the way she didn't collapse, the way she refinished that table herself and made plans for the Tybee rental income and thought about families coming through her hospital with nothing in writing. That's the other thing. Resilience isn't something you perform in the hard moment. It's something you practice in the ordinary ones. She'd been building it her whole life and just hadn't been tested that way before. Preston left with nothing because he only ever came for something. That's the simplest version of what happened. The people who treat others as inventory eventually discover that the real wealth in any family is not the kind that transfers by access or fraud. It lives in the decisions made in private, in the promises kept across years, in what a mother writes by hand for a daughter she won't get to watch grow old. That's what was in the box, not just documents. A love that planned ahead,